If you've looked into natural support for ADHD, you've probably come across L-Tyrosine. It's one of the most talked about supplements for focus and dopamine, but there's a lot of confusion out there about what it actually does, who it helps, and whether it's safe to combine with medication. In this video, I'm going to give you the full picture, the pros, the cons, and what to consider if you're thinking about trying it. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Dan Sullivan. I'm a licensed naturopathic medical doctor, a certified functional medicine practitioner, and I also have ADHD myself. On this channel, I aim to educate and empower using evidence-based medicine and a root cause lens, looking beyond medication alone to better understand what's really driving ADHD symptoms. So let's start with the basics. What is L-tyrosine and why are people with ADHD interested in it? Tyrosine is an amino acid, which is a building block of protein. You get it from food, especially high protein foods like meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. But the reason it's popular in the ADHD world is because it's a precursor to dopamine. So here's how that works. Your body takes L-tyrosine and converts it into L-dopa, which then gets converted to dopamine. Dopamine can then be further converted to norepinephrine and epinephrine. This is called the catecholamine pathway. Now, we know that ADHD brains typically have lower dopamine activity, so the logic goes, if I take more tyrosine, I'll have more raw material, which means more dopamine, which means better focus, motivation, and mood. And interestingly, there's actually some research supporting this rationale. One study found that people with ADHD had significantly lower plasma levels of tyrosine and other amino acids compared to controls. So for some people, there may be a real deficit that supplementation could address. However, and this is important, it's not as simple as more tyrosine equals more dopamine. The reality is more nuanced. So let's break down the pros and the cons. Starting with the pros. Pro number one, L-tyrosine does support dopamine production under the right conditions. Tyrosine is the raw material your body uses to make dopamine. It's not dopamine itself, but it's the building block. And if you're running low on that raw material, whether from stress, poor diet, or just high cognitive demand, supplementing with tyrosine can help replenish the tank. I sometimes see this in practice. A patient comes in who's been burning the candle at both ends. Maybe they're a parent juggling work and kids, or a student in the middle of finals, or someone going through a major life transition. They're mentally flat, their motivation is shot, and they feel like they're running on fumes. For some of these patients, tyrosine takes the edge off. It's not a miracle, but it gives them a little more bandwidth to work with. Now, this doesn't mean tyrosine will help everyone, but for people who are genuinely depleted, it can provide some relief, especially when combined with other foundational work. Pro number two, there's research showing cognitive benefits under stress. This is where the evidence is actually pretty solid, not for ADHD specifically, but for cognitive performance under demanding conditions. For example, one study looked at military cadets going through a demanding combat training course, including sleep deprivation, physical stress, and cognitive challenges. The cadets who received tyrosine showed improved cognitive performance and even reduced blood pressure compared to placebo. That is a meaningful finding. A 2015 review pulled together the available research and concluded that tyrosine effectively enhances cognitive performance, particularly in short-term stressful and/or cognitively demanding situations. The key phrase there is stressful or cognitively demanding. Tyrosine seems to help most when the system is already taxed, when dopamine is being used up faster that it can be replenished. It doesn't necessarily boost performance in someone who's well-rested, well-fed, and low stress. So if you're thinking of tyrosine as a general cognitive enhancer, the evidence doesn't really support that. But if you're under pressure and your brain is working overtime, there's reason to think it could help. Pro number three, it's relatively safe, well-tolerated, and inexpensive. Compared to a lot of other supplements out there, tyrosine has a pretty good safety profile. It's a naturally occurring amino acid. Your body already makes it and uses it every day. Most people tolerate it well at appropriate doses, and serious side effects are rare. It's also accessible. You don't need a prescription, it's not expensive, and you can find it at most health food stores or online. That makes it a low barrier option for people who want to try something before committing to more intensive interventions. I'll link the tyrosine product I use in clinical practice in the description below. It's from a professional grade company that I trust. With that said, generally safe doesn't mean safe for everyone in every situation. We'll talk about the exceptions in the cons section. But for most healthy adults, tyrosine is a reasonable thing to try. Pro number 4, it can be a useful adjunct, not a magic fix, but a helpful tool. I really want to be clear about this. Tyrosine is not going to fix your ADHD. It's not a replacement for medication, therapy, sleep, or lifestyle changes, but it can be a useful piece of the puzzle. I think of it like this. If you're building a house, tyrosine is not the foundation. It's not even the walls. It's more like a power tool. It can make the work easier and faster, but only if the rest of the structure is in place. Some of my patients find that tyrosine helps them feel a little sharper, a little more motivated, a little less foggy. It's not dramatic, but it can be noticeable. And when you're dealing with ADHD, those small improvements can certainly add up. The key is using it as part of a larger protocol. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, and addressing any underlying imbalances. Tyrosine works best when everything else is working as well. And pro number 5, it can complement stimulant medications when used correctly. This is something I get asked about a lot. Can I take tyrosine with Adderall? What about Vyvanse? Is it safe to combine them? The short answer is yes, but it needs to be done under a physician's guidance. Here's the logic. Stimulant medications work by increasing dopamine activity in the brain. They do this primarily by blocking the reuptake of dopamine so it stays in the synapse for longer. But they don't actually create more dopamine, they just make better use of what's already there. Over the course of the day, especially with medications that wear off in the afternoon, dopamine can get depleted. That's part of why people experience the crash, that feeling of fatigue, irritability, or brain fog as the medication wears off. Tyrosine, taken in the afternoon as the medication is wearing off, can help replenish dopamine and smooth out that transition. It's not adding more stimulation on top of the medication, it's supporting the system as the medication leaves. In my clinical experience, this works well for a lot of patients, but I want to emphasize this is something to discuss with your prescriber. Don't just add tyrosine on your own, especially if you're on a higher dose of stimulants or if you're sensitive to changes in your regimen. And if this video has been helpful so far, take a second to like the video because that does help YouTube to show it to more people who may really benefit from this information. Now let's talk about the cons because this is where a lot of people get tripped up. So con number 1, tyrosine alone doesn't guarantee more dopamine. This is probably the most important point in the whole video, so I want to make sure that it lands. Tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine, but precursor doesn't mean automatic conversion. Your body has to do work to turn tyrosine into dopamine, and that work requires specific enzymes and cofactors. First, tyrosine gets converted to L-dopa. This step requires iron and something called BH4, and you need folate to recycle that BH4. Then L-dopa gets converted to dopamine. This step depends on vitamin B6. And if you want to go further down the pathway, dopamine to norepinephrine, you need vitamin C and copper. Here's the point. If any of these cofactors are low, the conversion process slows down or stalls. You can take all the tyrosine you want, but if you don't have enough iron or B6, it's not going to turn into dopamine efficiently. Taking tyrosine without addressing cofactors is like putting gas in a car with a broken engine. The fuel is there, but it's not going to go anywhere. Now I want to talk about something I see all the time in clinical practice, and it's a big one for ADHD, the zinc to copper ratio. What I often see in my patients with ADHD is too much copper and not enough zinc. When copper is high, it pushes dopamine downstream to norepinephrine. And when zinc is low, dopamine signaling is compromised. The result? Low dopamine and elevated norepinephrine. Clinically, that can look like low motivation, poor focus, difficulty with task initiation, combined with anxiety, irritability, and feeling wired but tired. This is why I test every one of my patients for zinc and copper. It's not just about whether they're in range, it's about the ratio. And when we correct that imbalance, I often see real improvements, sometimes without changing anything else. And if you're interested in learning more, I made another video that goes over the zinc-copper ratio in more detail that I'll link to here. So before I recommend tyrosine, I want to know iron, B6, zinc, and copper status. If those are off, tyrosine probably won't do much, and we need to address the imbalance first. This is why working with a practitioner who understands these pathways can make a real difference. Con number 2 is conversion can be impaired by underlying issues. Even if your cofactors are fine, there are other things that can slow down the dopamine production pathway. Methylation problems are a big one. Methylation is a biochemical process that affects hundreds of reactions in your body, including neurotransmitter production. If you have genetic variants like MTHFR or COMT that affect methylation, you may not process tyrosine as efficiently. And if you're interested in learning more about MTHFR in the context of ADHD, I made an entire video on that I'll link to here. Chronic inflammation is another factor. When your body is in an inflammatory state, it diverts resources away from neurotransmitter production. The same raw materials that could be used to make dopamine get shunted toward other pathways. Gut issues matter as well. A lot of neurotransmitter precursors are absorbed in the gut, and if you have dysbiosis, leaky gut, or malabsorption, you may not be getting the tyrosine from your food or supplements into your system effectively. Liver dysfunction can also play a role since the liver is involved in processing amino acids. The bottom line is this: some people take tyrosine and feel nothing. And it's not necessarily because tyrosine doesn't work, it's because their system isn't ready to use it. There's a bottleneck somewhere else in the pathway, and until that's addressed, tyrosine won't move the needle. Con number 3, it can cause anxiety, irritability, or overstimulation in some people. This is an important one, especially for people with ADHD who also have anxiety, which is a lot of people, around 40% of kids and around 50% of adults. Tyrosine doesn't just increase dopamine, it increases catecholamines in general. That includes norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are your fight or flight hormones. For someone with a calm baseline, this might feel energizing and focusing. But for someone who's already anxious, already wired, already running on adrenaline, adding more catecholamines can make things worse. Signs to watch out for include feeling jittery or wired, increased heart rate, irritability or agitation, difficulty relaxing, and trouble falling asleep. If you notice any of these after starting tyrosine, it's a signal that your system may not need more stimulation, it may actually need calming support instead. This is why I always tell patients to start low and pay attention. If tyrosine makes you feel worse, that's useful information. It tells us something about your nervous system state and what you actually need. Con number 4, the research on ADHD specifically is limited. I've talked about the research on tyrosine and cognitive performance, and it's promising. But I want to be honest, most of that research is not on people with ADHD. The studies are looking at healthy adults under stress, military personnel, sleep-deprived subjects, people doing demanding cognitive tasks. That's not the same as having ADHD. The underlying neurobiology is different, and we can't assume that what works for stress-induced cognitive decline will work for ADHD. There is one early study that looked at tyrosine specifically for ADHD. It was a small trial, 10 adults with ADHD. 8 of them showed marked improvement in the first 2 weeks. That sounds good, but by 6 weeks, all 8 of those responders had developed tolerance. Basically, the effect wore off. So we have some evidence of short-term benefit, but the long-term picture is unclear. And we simply don't have large, well-designed trials to guide us. What this means practically is that tyrosine might help some people with ADHD, but we're somewhat extrapolating from related research. It's a reasonable thing to try, but go in with realistic expectations. And con number 5, it doesn't address root causes. This is something I come back to over and over on this channel because it's so important. Tyrosine can support dopamine production, but it won't fix the things that are depleting your dopamine in the first place. If you're chronically sleep deprived, tyrosine isn't going to solve that. If your blood sugar is all over the place because you're skipping meals or eating poorly, tyrosine isn't going to stabilize it. If you have gut dysbiosis that's affecting your neurotransmitter production, tyrosine isn't going to heal your gut. If you're under chronic stress and your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode, tyrosine might actually make that worse. Tyrosine is a tool. It can be a helpful tool, but it's not the solution. If you're relying on tyrosine without addressing the foundations like sleep, nutrition, movement, stress, gut health, you're essentially putting a band-aid on a bigger issue. The goal isn't to find the one supplement that fixes everything. The goal is to build a foundation that supports your brain and body and then use targeted tools like tyrosine to fill in the gaps where needed. So who might benefit from trying tyrosine and who should be cautious? Tyrosine is most likely to help if you're under high cognitive or physical stress, if you're depleted from burning the candle at both ends, or if your cofactors are already in good shape and you just need more raw material. It can also be a useful add-on if you're on stimulant medication and experiencing afternoon crashes, again, under a physician's guidance. On the other hand, you should be cautious or skip it entirely if you're prone to anxiety or overstimulation, if you have high copper or low zinc, if you're taking MAO inhibitors, or if you have hyperthyroidism. In those cases, adding more catecholamine precursors can backfire. If you're going to try it, here's how I'd approach it. Work with your healthcare provider to find the right dose for you. Generally, people start low and work up from there. Take it in the morning or early afternoon on an empty stomach for best absorption. Don't combine it with protein-heavy meals since other amino acids compete for absorption. Track how you feel. Are you sharper, calmer, more motivated, or are you more anxious, irritable, or wired? Give it at least a week or two at a consistent dose before deciding if it's working. And ideally, get your cofactors tested first. If any of those are off, address them before expecting tyrosine to do very much. So to wrap up, L-Tyrosine is not a magic fix. It won't work for everyone and it won't address the root causes of what's driving your symptoms. But for the right person in the right context, it can be a helpful tool. If you want to dig deeper into some of the topics I mentioned today, check out my video on the zinc-copper connection over here and my video on the MTHFR and ADHD connection over here. And if you're interested in working with me to get to the bottom of what's actually going on, testing your cofactors, looking at your methylation, addressing gut health, building a real foundation, I'd be happy to help. You can book a discovery call using the link in the description.